Okay, so I've just moved back into my sewing room, and you can see here I've just used these lovely little handy little clips just to remind me which piece that I'm working on. So it's a bit high, wasn't it? Little handy little clips there. Gift from my friend Lindsay. So these are all labelled up now. So this is our 2 dowel pockets. This is our bow and straps, and this is our binding, and then I've cut the edge of the doweling. Now if your doweling is a little bit rough on the end, what you can do is use an emery board as a makeshift sander and just sand off those edges. You don't want anything too sharp, otherwise it's going to poke through the fabric of your calendar. So just take a little emery board and just file these down just to make them nice and neat. I did actually manage to cut those just with a sharp knife, just taking my time and on a chopping board and watching my fingers. But yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I've got no sharp edges on there. That one's okay. There's this one here now. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to do next is I'm going to iron out my strips. All of these, I'm going to work on each one in turn. And if we work with the dowel pocket first, I'm going to take this to the ironing board, and I'm just going to turn over the edge by a quarter of an inch, and then again by a quarter of an inch, and then we're going to run a row of stitching just down this edge just to hold it neat and tidy, and that will just make sure there's no rough ends on there. Just make sure that your doweling strip will still fit, and adjust if necessary. If you need to take a little bit more off, then you can do. And if you want to wait until you've got these strips finished. Now when we have finished, we do want to fully enclose this, but I'm going to wait until we finish sewing the binding on, and then once we've done this bit here and we've got the doweling enclosed, as it will be like this, then I will do just a few little stitches across the end here just to seal that in by hand, just so that doweling can't get out. So just bear that in mind when you're cutting your doweling. You probably need it a little bit shorter than your strips. So I'm going to do that with this one first, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I've just ironed these ends across. I've done that on all four, 2 on this strip and 2 on the other. I'm just going to run a row of stitches just down this edge here. Just get my machine ready. And what I've found is that when I'm sewing on these narrow hems like this, if you actually move your needle across into the space, it's much easier to follow. So if I knock this needle position down to 0 and then just position that right on the edge, I can follow the edge here, but those stitches are going to be really quite close to that edge. So let's just do that. I'm not going to back tack on this, I'm just going to do a straight run through. And again, I'm going to do what's called chain piece. So I'm just going to slot the next one straight in under here and just carry straight on. Saves cutting your thread in between. When I'm nearly finished, I'm just going to pull round the other end without cutting it again. Slot it in. Just do that one. Just saves a little bit of thread. I know it's only minor, but okay, let's just take this out and just cut our threads. Can't put my hand on my snips at the moment. I don't quite know where I've put those. They'll be tidied away somewhere. Well, maybe not in my sewing room. It tends to be a little bit chaotic when I'm creating. Just take all of those threads off. Okay, nice and neat. So the next thing that I'm going to do now is just fold this in half like that, so the ends are together. And I'm just going to give it a quick press on the iron just to hold that fold in there. We don't need it to be folded per se, but I just don't want it shifting while I'm trying to work with it. So let me just iron those. And then I'm just going to run just a tacking stitch quite close to the edge down here. So I just want those to stay together for me whilst we are working with them. And if we take our needle, sorry, our stitch length up to 4 or 5, it'll just put a nice big tacking stitch in there for us. It's not quite level, is it, on the fold there? And just slot the other one in. Put a nice big stitch in there just to hold that together for me just while we're working with it, and it doesn't open out for it on us. So those can now be put to one side because these are now, these 2 doweling strips are finished. So what I'm going to do is just fold them in half, put the clip back on them, and these clips are really useful and also labelling things up in case you get interrupted whilst you're working on your project, and then you can then just come back to it. The binding we're going to leave. Next we're going to work on the bow and the straps for the quilt, the advent calendar. And this is quite long at the moment, but we'll cut this down. And all I'm going to do is fold this in half. So I've got a selvage edge on there. Let me just take that off. We don't want to sew with the selvage edge. Take those off at each end. And again on here, I'll probably put those 2 together, can't I? Save some time. Okay, and then what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn these around and put them right sides together like this. Now when I'm doing these, I am just going to press the end just here, just for a second, and I'll show you why in a moment. So just on one end, I'm just going to press it in half, right sides together, because I'm going to do a little like a bow end on the ends of these. Okay, so what we're going to do is get my seam gauge so we can make sure that they're equal. So for the bottom 2.5 inches, I'm just going to mark 2.5 inches on these. I'm going to taper the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper the end. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to do a little bit of a flat end, and then between here and here, I'm just going to draw a line just to follow. Okay, and that's going to give us a nice little pointed end to that. So that's one marked up. So let's do the other one. So I'm just coming in about 1/4 inch. Leave a little flat end because you'll never get it to a perfect point. Then to 1/4 inch from here to there, and then just draw a line just to follow. This is just with my Frixion pen that will just heat erase. So that there is the right, and that'll just give us a nice tapered edge on the end of that. We'll snip this off after we've sewn it, and that'll give us that nice tapered edge. So let's just take this to the sewing machine now. Put our stitch length back to 2.2 and our needle position back to 3.5, and we're ready to go. So I'm just going to sew over this end here. I'm just going to back tack as well at the end here. And turn. And forward. Needle down into our work using our up down button just so that we can pivot and without making it uneven. Make sure we've got our 2 edges together. You can pin this along the length if you wish. And I'm just going to follow that line. And then leaving our needle in our work. Remember, you can hand crank it if you need to. And then we're just going to line these edges up, press a foot down, and then just sew all the way along the length. As I say, these are going to be quite long, so don't be too dismayed. just stop every now and again just to rearrange your fabric. Just back tack at the end because we're going to be turning this, so we just want it to be fairly robust. Snip off our threads down to the other end, snip off the original one, and then what we're going to do now is just trake off this edge here. So we're just going to trim that around because we want to get rid of some of the bulk, and then about 1/4 inch to the end, and then we can take off the corner there and take off the corner there. Okay, we'll just trim that off. So the next job we've got then is to turn this out. So, before we turn it out, I'm just going to press these open because it does actually just help it when you're turning it. You can finger press it like this, just open up that seam allowance and finger press it back, or you can take it to your iron and just iron that open, because it does help that seam when you get it turned round. It does help that seam lie flat. So once you press one seam like that open, then just press this other one again open the other way, and it will just help it lie flat when we've turned it. Okay, so I've just pressed mine just so that it's folded back like that. And then the trick then is to try and fold it round the other way. So if you get it started, and then what I do is I use, you might have a turning tool, in which case use that, but if not, then you can use a knitting needle. So we just get it started enough to grab hold of, and this isn't too bad a tube because it's quite wide really. Better than little rouleau straps. Trying to turn those can be a little tricky at times. So once we've got it started like that, I'm going to get a knitting needle. Just want a metal one with a blunt end, and then you can gently pull that along and it just unfolds for you. So I'll just bring this up a little bit higher so you can see. Excuse the mess in the background. You know me, I've got several projects on the go at any one time. Come on. You know you want to turn. That's it. Just coax it a little bit and you'll be able to get it to turn. Just by pulling it down over the knitting needle. It does get a little bit tighter as it goes down, so just help it down. Just having to turn through more each time. Just make sure you're not pressing into your body with the point of that knitting needle, because you will do yourself an injury. We are getting there. This is where using good quality fabric does help, because it is quite nice and strong. Keep helping it down the tube, and then it does take the pressure off. Right, it might be towards the end, folks. Is that where it's narrowing? Not yet. There we go, all of a sudden it just goes, doesn't it? Okay, and then we can turn our knitting needle around the other way around on our tube. And using the spike this time, push it all the way down, and then we can coax out the end without hopefully going through the end of our fabric. Just give it a little poke. This is why I say you're better off having a flat end to your strap, because it's unlikely that you'll be able to get all the way down And you can just use a pin. Hopefully you can, oh, I'm off camera. Just use a pin just to coax out that final little bit. Just be careful not to pull through on your fibres though. If you're too rough with it, you'll just pull fibres and have little fluffy bits at the end. You can just unroll that. There we go. And we can just use the edge of the knitting needle against that seam now, just to push that out to that edge. We've got a nice little taper on the edge of here. Just roll your fabric and you can see how that's just made that nice and flat. So then this can just be pressed flat. And then we're just going to work on the other one and just sew along the same way and just duplicate it for the other one. So as you're just drawing in these strips, if you just roll it between your fingers, because we've already ironed that seam, it'll allow the stitching edge to come to the fore. And then if you just hold it down onto your table with your ironing board with your fingers, you can then just give a quick press. Just watch out for the steam so you don't burn yourself. But again, as you can see, look, it's all kind of like this. But if you kind of feel for that tube, and that's why we folded those back, because it does want to sit, those seam allowances inside do want to sit now open to one side, and it does just make it slightly easier just for you to be able to iron this flat. Then the next decision you've got to make is whether or not you want to top stitch or not these ties. I think I am going to top stitch mine. I do think it helps it stay flatter. It stops it from bunching up into a lump. But again, we just get to the end of this and just roll it with your fingers, and you'll see those stitches and that seam just come to the edge, because you want that seam right on the very edge, and then just press it flat. Okay. So then I'm just going to start on the edge here. Just going to take my stitch length up to a 3.5, because we're top stitching, so we tend to lengthen the stitch length. Oh, foot pedal's disappeared. There we go. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, just to secure those ends. And then I'm going to put my needle in my work, one stitch forward. And then I'm going to just then follow that one, maybe one more stitch. So a bit right on the edge there. And just hold on to the edge, the threads at the back there, just to help guide it through if it's a little bit tight. So around where the edge is. And then if you kind of position your fingers, you can then just kind of not have to do anything, and you can keep it, the strap, quite straight as you're just going down. So as you can see, I'm anchoring with this finger and that finger on either side, and this is just guiding it flat. So there's very minimal movement needed once we get to that stage. As long as the finger's in the right position, you should be able to just go straight the way down. Ease off your speed when you get to the end, and just guide that little bit through. I'm just going to go across the end here. I'm just going to go all the way down the other side, just in exactly the same way. Towards the end now, so just ease up on the speed, take your time, because otherwise it'll whip out of your fingers and then go skew if at the end. I'm just going to actually, thinking about it, the next one I'll probably start at the bottom and then we won't have these endings at the top. That's me not thinking, that's me just getting on and deciding as we go along. So this one, let's do it the other way around. So let me just show you that. So I've got a lovely nice flat strap there. So this time I'm going to start at the raw edge and we're going to go down one side. So pretty much just line your fabric up, get yourself started. I don't need to back tack because that'll be hidden inside. And then with one finger this side and one finger that side, you can kind of anchor it so it's running through a channel with your fingers. And as long as your strap's been ironed straight, you can go quite fast. And your stitching should be fairly level. So again, before the end comes through your fingers, ease up and just guide that little bit through by hand, just gently. So needle in the work, do one stitch across the bottom here. Oh, maybe one more. It's not taking it doesn't always take it very well at the end here. And then just start off slowly. Yeah, it's not going through very well. Get that awl. Just use your awl and just very gently you can just help just move that along one stitch at a time just to get it started. Once you're through and off that end bit, then you should be fine. So let's go down the slanted bit first, and then this is going to then straighten up. And now we can just do what we were doing before. Oops. She says, just anchor your fingers. A little bit of tension just to hold it flat on with my fingers on the top, but not much to stop it from being pulled through. So again, coming to the end, ease up and just guide that little bit through as you would normally. It's better, isn't it? Take the ends off here. And again, we've got another lovely stitched strap there. So these are now done for now. I'm going to put those to one side, put them back on, put my clip back on them. I'll just move this back a bit. Finish with the knitting needle as well, so I can tidy that up. Let's just put our clip back on those, so we know which bit is which one. Oh, there's a little label, that's it. And then the next we're going to do now is we're going to prep our binding. So if you remember, we had our binding strips here. We've got two long ones and we've got two short ones. First thing I need to do is take off the selvage edge. Keep that as straight as possible. And again, we've got one in here. Oops, that's my awl. So it's short a bit. I've got these two longer bits here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this shorter bit in between these two longer bits. It's just my preference, it's up to you what you do. But what we're going to do is make one long continuous piece of binding, and the way that we do that is we put them right sides together and we have one east to west and one north to south on top of each other. And what I tend to do is I just leave them a little bit overlapped like that, so I can just see the edge here and an edge here, because what we want to do now is just turn them at 45 degrees, because I want to just draw a line across here for me to follow. You can eyeball it, but it's sometimes better to type. I'm going to go from the outside edge to the outside edge. We're not using the inside edge at all. It's always outside edge to outside edge on the corners. I'm just going to put that little diagonal line at 45 degrees there. And then I'm going to take two pins. This is shifted slightly, can you see? Two pins. And I'm going to pin one over this side. And I'm then going to pin the other one over this side here. because what we want is for that not to be into that line to end and start on the corners. And that one's shifted again, look. Hold on 1 second, let's get it right. How can I show you right if I don't get it right, correct myself, hey? So that now starts and ends on there. It's just the angle had just changed slightly on it with handling it. Okay, nice and flat. And then what we do is we go to the end of this one now and we just fold it over that way so we've got the top again. We're going to take the end of our second long strip and we're going to do exactly the same. So one east to west and put the north to south over the top with it just being a little bit proud. And then what we can do is we can just use a straight edge of some description to then just draw a diagonal line through here. Before I move it, I'm learning. I'm just going to hold that down and I'm just going to put some pins in so that it doesn't shift on me whilst I was working with it. Oh, the pen's not worked for some of the line. Just go back and do that bit again. There we go. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for now. Just those two joins, and then I'm going to hold it up and measure it against my quilt to make sure this is going to be the right size once we finish. So let's just sew this first. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. So we're just going to put this into the sewing machine. We're just going to line it up, so we're going to stitch straight down that line there. I'm going to take my stitch length back down to 2.2 because it's construction stitching that we're doing, not top stitching. I'm not going to start and stop at the end. And this is another place where we can use chain stitching again, so we can just feed this one in as well. A few stitches in between. And then depending on what we do this with a quilt, depending on how many pieces, we're just going to keep going along there. Okay, for us we've just got this. You might have, if you've got a smaller piece of fabric, you might have more joins, but just join them exactly the same way until you've got a piece that's long enough to go around your quilt advent calendar. So we just take the pins out and then you'll see the magic happen. Because what happens now, although that looks like it'll never going to work, if you fold that out, you can see that the strip is now continuous on both of those two parts. So the next step, so once we've checked that, I mean, I always check it first like this before I start snipping off, because if it's not right, you can undo these stitches and get it right first so that you've got a nice continuous 45-degree angle on there. But once we're happy with that, I'm going to take that little bit off there. And then about 1/4 inch seam allowance. You don't want too much because you don't want it to be too bulky. And then just smooth it off there. And then what I'm going to do is now press this seam open like that. You can either finger press it or iron it, whichever you prefer. And that will just now sit open. And the theory behind joining it this way and not just joining it, I've got these two ends. Because if we just join it this way, and you could argue that you can do that and save all the faff, but if you join it that way, when you open it out, you've got all of that bulk in one place. If you join it on the horizontal like this, then when we, if I'm where the one I've already snipped on, I'll do this. I've got to snip it anyway. Just snip this off, look at 45. You can use your rotary cutter if you want to be a bit more precise, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. So when you've got this and you open it out on your 45-degree angle and press it with your fingers or with your iron, then when we're going to press this neck, well, that bulk there has now been distributed against that section there. It's not just all condensed into one section here, so that makes it much easier and makes it lie much flatter. So it's just a quilting tip, but it's a good way of doing it. It might be the first time you've done it. If ever you've done it, I think Missouri Star Quilt Company, they have a very good binding tutorial as well. So what I'm going to do now is just going to press these seams open, and then I'll show you how we make sure that we've got this in half first and press it in half. So let's just press these seams open first. This is quite a small section, that might be a problem later on, but what hopefully you won't notice it too much if it's tucked down one side, but we'll see. So the next thing we're going to do now is just fold them in half, wrong sides together, and press. just all the way along the length of this binding. I've just got my binding all in one length, and I'm going to pass it along one side here. It's going to need to fold and go along this side here. That's 2. It's going to need to fold 3. That's going to need to fold. Oh, I'm just short. I'm just short on mine, so I'm going to have to undo a little piece. So what I'll probably do is undo this piece here and make it a bit longer. So apologies that makes me look slightly incompetent, which hopefully you don't think that I am. But what I'm going to do is just undo those quick seams and add a longer strip in, and then sew it back up again. I could just leave it like that and add another short bit on the edge here, but you want as few joins as you can really in your binding if you can help it. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So just bear with me while I just correct this shortage that I've got, and then I'll come back to you. So I've just finished re-stitching my binding. Let's just have another trial run. So we need another bit, enough to go along there, a bit for a turn, along to the bottom corner there, that's 2, bit for a turn, for 3, bit for a turn, and 4 with a bit left over. So yes, I'm very happy with that. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do now is we are going to be putting the binding on, but first of all, we just got to think of our construction order. So let's get the top of our quilt to the top first. Oh no, I'll tell you what, we'll work with the bottom first, because what we're going to do is we're just going to baste the doweling pocket on the bottom here first. So I'm going to take one of my doweling pocket strips and I'm going to lay it on here. I'm going to find the centre of the strip and I'm going to put a pin in there just to hold that steady for me so I know where that is. And then I'm going to mark the centre of my quilt by pulling the 2 corners together and getting a half in the middle there. And then I am then going to put the centre of one against the centre of the other. And I'm going to match up the raw edges there because we know that that should be about right, and it is. So that, I'm happy with that on either end. And then what we can do is just put a little tacking stitch through that with the machine. So I'll just put some of these things out of the way. Machine forward. Do need to learn to tidy up as I go along. So let's just rest that against the edge. It doesn't need to be right up against the edge because we're going to be covering this edge over with the binding anyway. But we want it enough that it just holds it in place for us. Now, if you have got a walking foot for your machine, and a walking foot looks like this, then I would suggest you pop it on, because we're dealing with lots of different layers now. Then it will be an advantage if you have got one. If you haven't, don't worry, you might have to just loosen up. There'll be a way on your machine of loosening how much pressure goes through the presser foot, and because we're dealing with thicker fabrics, if you lessen that off, it should reduce the drag. Okay, so this is just going on here. Just pinning along the edge there. We need some more light, don't we? Hold on one second. Hopefully that's a little bit better. So what we've got here is we've got the pins across. It's shy of the edges. We want it to be shy of the edges because we've got to put the binding on the back here. You can see little tacking stitches on the edge, and I've not quite got it right up to the edge, but we're now just going to do just a large stitch holding this down. I need to put on my walking foot as I've recommended all of you to do. So let me just do that change over and put my walking foot on. It'll take me just a couple of seconds. And I think with sewing you have to get used to changing your feet over for the right job, because sometimes we try to persevere when actually a few seconds of changing the foot over when it cooperates for us. is good. So let's just pop that on there. It doesn't take long, as I said. If your fingers will work for you, it doesn't take long. Making this look much harder than it is. Just handling the screwdriver, it's because it's loose, it keeps dropping out. And what happens with the walking foot is, I've done it on my, said about this on my videos before, is it actually has got feed dogs underneath the foot here. So if you look at your ordinary foot, there's no grip at all on here, it's flat and smooth. Well, underneath here, there are feed dogs that fit into the rough pointy bits underneath here, which are called your feed dogs, and so it grabs the fabric evenly like that as it's taking it through the machine, so it does just make it easier to sew with. So now let's just start here. Now what I'm going to do is going to move my needle again, so if I leave my presser foot on the edge of my sewing and move my needle across to the furthest point, it'll just do a row of stitching along here for me, and I want it to be at 5 as well, so I want it to be quite big stitches, because again it's just a tacking stitch. Needle down in our work before we take our pins out so that it doesn't knock anything that we're working with. The reason I'm using a large stitch length is that if any of these stitches show when we actually put the binding on, I can easily take them out. If you did this at a size 2.2, which is what our normal construction size is, you'll spend a long time trying to unpick those, and also you run the risk of damaging your quilt as well. So the walking foot is noisier, but as I say, it does just hold those layers together really nicely. And if you are going to be, if you've enjoyed this process and you want to do some more quilting, they are about £50. Well, it was for my Janome, but they're a real investment, and you won't regret it. Investment in your sewing, great for a Christmas or a birthday present, or just because present. So because that's a tacking stitch, we don't need to do anything else to that. And what I'm going to do now is talk to you about the construction for the other side, because now we need to think about the other side. Where's the other thread gone? There it is. Okay. So here we've got our doweling rod for the bottom here, and hopefully it's just going to stick up. We can always put a few stitches just to hold it up if we do, and this is what's going to happen. This doweling here is going to feed all the way along there. Mine's a little bit long at the moment, so I'm going to cut it off, and then we're going to sew that in, and then that's just going to keep the bottom of the panel just nice and flat. Just adds a little bit of weight to it as well, but not much. And if it falls down below the bottom of the panel, then we can always just put a couple of stitches by hand at the back here just to hold it up if we wanted to. But now we need to think about putting on the top edge here, because we do need a doweling pocket, which I've knocked on the floor, to go on the edge here. But we also need to have, so let's just put this on here just roughly for now, because I want to just talk to you about the order that we do these things in and just thinking it through. So if we have our doweling pocket on here, we feed a piece of doweling into there so that we can just demonstrate and just check this out. Oh, can't because the pins are in the way. Oh, silly Claire. Put them that way instead. Now we can feed our doweling through. So when this is hanging up like this, which way round do we want everything? Because I think that I want to have my straps, which are, that's my binding, where have I put my straps? Very handily falling in the bin. I don't want that to happen, do we? So I want the straps to be at the back here as well. Now the reason why I'm asking this and demonstrating this with you is it's just the thinking process really, because if we just put these on the edge here, one on each side, and these are too long at the moment, but it's just to give us an idea. And I angle them slightly because when they're hanging, you'll see. I'll use my wardrobe door in a minute just to show you. That's angling the wrong way, that needs to be that way. So you want them angling in towards the centre of the quilt. Because then if we put our binding on as well, we need to make sure that we can get our binding on and our straps on and our doweling strap or dowelling channel, and it's not going to interfere with the way that the quilt works. Okay. So let me move over to the wardrobe and I'll be able to show you. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so I'm just working this out because what I want to happen is that when these are tied together, and this is too long at the moment, I know, but I'll give you an idea. So let's just tie that in a bow for the moment. So when that's hanging, it's a bit low, isn't it? But anyway, I don't want the doweling to be pulled up because the strap is behind it. What I want is the doweling to sit behind and the strap to come out of the top. Oops, without the binding being in the way. So I can just do a quick demonstration. So what I'm saying is just pin yours together in order just to have a trial and just to make sure it's going to work how you want it to work. So we can see that the doweling, and especially when that's got the sides in, will hold the quilt rigid for us because this isn't all pinned on yet. And so I believe that I've got the order correct of that. So let me just show you the order that I've chosen. So we first are going to tack on the doweling strip here like we've done at the bottom. Then on top of the doweling strip I'm going to then put the strap. So let me just take this pin out because I want to take the binding off because I want to do the binding from the other side. And I'll show you why in a minute. So that's the order I'm going to do mine. So I'm going to have my quilt back. I'm then going to have my doweling strip for my fabric, and then I'm going to put my strap over the top. So I want you to do that first because I think that'll be the correct way. Obviously when you finish watching the video you can choose whether that's the way you want it to be or not, but it's definitely the way I want it to be. So that's what I'm going to do now. So let me just get you back to my work table and we'll carry on with that. Just had another thought. Before we do that, let's just alter the length of the straps and the ribbons and the bows and what have you that we want. Oh, doweling's come undone. Hold on 1 second. Oh, best laid plans and all that. Right. So that's the doweling strip pinned on. And then I want to put on the bow as well. So we angle the bow in towards the centre, the strap. So the short end goes out towards the edge of the quilt and the angled section, because when I've tried to do it just straight before, it distorts the way the advent calendar hangs. It'll all make sense. Right, okay, so bear with me. So we've got our doweling strip in the back and that'll be secured at both ends. But what I want to do now is just sort of work out this distance here to make it look aesthetically nice and the length of the straps here. So if we tie a bow first and decide how long we want our straps to be, if we're having a nice little bow, tying that on my knee so you can't see, can you? But it's just, I'm just tying it into a bow. I'll just give it a bit of a pull. Okay, so that gives us a nice little bow. You could decide whether that's enough of a strap that you want or enough for the tails of your bow that you want when it's hanging up. Let me just see if that'll twist around it a little bit for now. So then you can then adjust that as and when to make it into a nice bow. The reason why I've chosen a bow is because not all wardrobes have a knob like this, or not all doors have a knob like this. Sometimes they've got the longer thin ones that you've got to thread it through. So whoever uses it will have to undo the bow, thread it through the handle and then tie it in a bow. So that's why I've kept mine open like that. But this is obviously now too low down. So what I'm going to do now is just adjust this. And you'll see what I mean by the, ouch, that was my finger. Going to see what I mean by the straps being longer or shorter. and get them even once we've sorted, but for now we're just looking aesthetically at how long we want it to be. So that fits quite nicely, I think. You've got quite a nice distance here. It's not too high, it's not too low, so that will probably do. But just adjust yours, and again the distance from here and here as well, as to how wide you want that to be. I think the wider that it is, how far apart these two straps are, the more you've got an inclination for it to gather in the middle. So just bear that in mind. But likewise, if you have them too narrow in the middle, it's going to look off centre as well. So we're just trying to get some sort of guidance as to where we want it to be, and I think that works quite nicely for me. So that's probably where I'm going to work with mine. So the next thing that I'm going to do now is take this off here. I'm going to undo the bow. I'm going to put the two ends together because I want these straps to be equal. And then I am then going to move you over to my table. So that we don't lose the place, when I take this strap out, I'm going to put the pin straight in. Okay, and I'm also going to put another pin straight up here to mark where we'd got them positioned. So again, let's take this one out here. Let's put a pin in first to mark where it was positioned. And again, this is just trial and error, but hopefully by showing you my process, it means that you realise that some of it is just trial and error, and there might be some definitive decisions, but you can make your mind up about some things as well. So now what I'm going to do is just put these two ends together, and then I'm just going to basically split the difference between how long these are. So let's just see, they might just be about the same. Ooh. Oh look, we're not too far off, are we? So basically I'm just going to cut this off now in between the middle here, because I know that's roughly where I want it to be. Let's do it the longer of the two. So we've just taken a little bit off the end. So they are quite long. You do need quite a long bow in order to be able to sew it. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to measure the ends in here either side, because we want this to be equal from the edge as well. So let me get a tape measure. So this one in from the edge is about 12 centimetres, and this one in from the edge is about 10 centimetres. So let's have them both at 11, split the difference. So measure in 11 centimetres, and then I'm going to put the pin there. And then on this one I'm going to measure in 11 centimetres, and I'm going to put the pin there. Okay. So that's for the straps. Let's just go back to this as well, because we just roughly put this onto the back, the dowelling. Let's take the dowelling out for now, I don't need that. But again, what I'm going to do is just fold this in half and put a pin. Just be aware of any threads you've got. If you've got too many, just snip them off if you can, because they will be annoying for you when you're trying to sew this on. Right, okay. So then we're going to go back to the middle of our advent panel, split it in half, and then just mark the centre point there with another pin. Okay, so then we get our dowelling strip, which is here with the pin. Put the two centres together because we now know that they're right. And then we're going to just line this up with the going along the back of the quilt panel. I talk about it like it's a quilt, but the process is pretty much the same for a full quilt, which is why I said that if you were interested in quilting but not quite sure whether it was for you, this is actually quite a nice little project to whet your appetite. I must admit, I do feel very out of practice with that's slightly off, I think, somehow. Why is this one longer than the other? So I do apologise if my video isn't quite up to where it would normally be. I do just feel a little rusty, I think it's fair to say. Just move that along slightly. But hopefully, I know one or two of you have said that you've either got a panel in your stash that you've not used yet, or that you've not had the confidence to have a go at quilting and you thought this would be a way to have a go. Hopefully I've just whetted your appetite. I don't have all the answers. I'm just a home sewist like you are, but hopefully this is a little bit useful just to show you how to put it together. Okay, so we've got that panel and we've got an equal amount at either end, here and here. Oh, camera's light's not in the right place. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take each strip now of the strip of the strap, and where the pin is marking it, so you're going to have to angle it. So I'm going to put the bottom point on there and have the outside point towards the edge of the quilt slightly higher, and then I'm going to put a pin in, because if we put the pin in across like that we can test it, and what we want is for the, no, I need to do it the other way around. This is why we test things. Right, so I'm going to have so I'm going to angle that across and have that point so that it's there. Do it across that way, Claire. Because then when we hold that up, that's going to be at a slight angle, which gives it the angle into the centre of the quilt. Okay, so just to confirm that, so let me just measure that again as well, because I think I've lost my place. So I was 11 centimetres in from the edge and I put a pin, and then with the strap I'm going to put the inside edge here. So outside edge is going to go on the edge of the quilt, and then the inside edge is slightly proud. Can you see we've got an ear sticking up there, the triangle, and then I'm then going to put that across there. So just to try it, make sure that your strap, once it's on, is pointing in the right direction towards the middle of your quilt, because that's where we want to be able to work with it. Then once you're happy, can just then pin that in place using these pins here, and we are going to reinforce that when we're sewing it on. So let's go to the other side and do the same thing again. So I suppose if it's lying on the quilt, it's actually lying in towards the middle on the back here. We just want that angle when we turn it up. So again, we've got the raw edge of our strap, and we're going to put it so that if we angle it in towards the middle of the quilt, the strap, and we have the point, cut edge of the point on the outside of the quilt, that's the one for the binding, and this is the one marking the exit, and we've got it just at the back there. Just move that across there, just to hold it in place for us. And then when we do have sewn those on, those are going to fall into the right place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tack those into place, because there's just too much to be working with if we try and do this all in one go with the binding. So we're just going to do that same tacking stitch along here and along through the straps as well, and that'll just hold them in place. Just make sure as well, because you know we need to check these things, you're putting your straps onto the top of your quilt as well. I know that might sound like it's really obvious, but a double check at this stage saves a bit of frustration and time with the unpicker later. So that's what we're going to do next. So I still have my stitch length set at 5, and I still have my needle across to the side here. And I'm just going to then just run this running stitch. I'm not going to go backwards and forwards at the start. Make sure you miss your pins. We don't sew over pins if we can help it. And just keep everything all just nice and neat to the edge of your quilt. Another one just there, look. We're just tacking this down so that we can work with it. Holds it in place, because if we're trying to manage through too many different layers all at once, we're going to lose our place. And if you find it difficult to work with all the pins when the straps, there's no problem at all with attaching the doweling strip first by the tacking stitches and then just going over where your straps are positioned afterwards. So just do whatever works best for you. It's your project at the end of the day. I'm not going to be there telling you off. Oops, nearly went over that pin. And again, because this is just a tacking stitch, I'm not going to back tack. Okay, let's take our threads off. Start and stop. Okay. So this is where we are at the moment. We've got our strap held on. We can just take that off now. Just take the edge off here, just so it's flush with the edge of the quilt. And the same with this one. Okay, just make sure you're not going to damage your top. And then we can know then that from the back here they're going to be pulling in the right direction when they're stitched on. So the reason why I wanted those at the back, now before we do anything else, what I want you to do is just take these, and if you've got a safety pin, because otherwise you're going to forget that it's there. Oops. Don't just love takeaway pots, hey, for putting things in. Just take a safety pin and just somewhere, just clip your straps out of the way. If you can try and sort of keep them so they're going to stay in the middle of your quilt and out of the way of your binding, that is a good plan. Just make sure there's no pressure on pulling your quilt out of shape though. Because we want these straps to stay in the middle of the work, in the middle of our project now, and not get entangled up in the binding. Okay, so they're just strapped on the back there like that for me, out of the way. It just leaves the edges free. Now the reason why we're doing the things that we have and tacked those on first is because we're going to work on the binding next. And what I want to do is I've just folded the binding in half and sewn it like this. I'm sorry, I haven't sewn it, it's just folded in half and pressed. But what we're going to do is we're going to line the binding up with the edge of the quilt, and then we're going to sew this using a 2.2 stitch length along the edge of the quilt. Now I machine sew mine on the front because I hand sew it on the back, and my machine stitching is generally neater than my machine quilting, so this is how I find it's best to do it. And we're going to do it with just a scant 1/4 inch stitch length, seam allowance, because when we fold this over we need enough for it to go over and go to the back, and we don't just want it to cover our stitches at the back, and that's the row of stitches that I will then sew it to on the back. We'll break it all down, don't worry. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on the bottom of the quilt first with one side. That was just to show you what we're going to be doing. And if you've got any binding clips, these are really useful to use as well. Trusty hummus tub here. Put those away. Right, okay. So binding clips, really useful. So I'm going to have a join in the centre bottom of my quilt, and I'm going to be sewing this way round. So what we want to do is we want to just kind of overlap this into the middle. So if we count the middle of our pockets, then we know where we're going to be starting. Okay, I'm going to put a binding clip, and I'm just, so the actual binding itself is going on the front of the quilt, and I'm going to just take it down at the moment to this first corner, because we're going to show you what we're going to do with the corners when we get there. So we are sewing through our doweling pocket as well on the back of our quilt, and we've got our backing there, so it's going through all of those layers. But when I start stitching, I'm going to leave a bit of an overlap here and start about in the middle here, and then start along, because we want a flap so that we can join it seamlessly at the end. Okay, so at the end here we're going to do something called mitered corners. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew to here. There's my Frixion pen, so I can just show you. So we're going to sew along here, about 1/4 inch. And then when we get towards the end here, we're going to stop and pivot at the middle, and then we're going to sew off at an angle like that. Because what we need to do is we need to fold our fabric out of the way when we've finished, and then continue down this way here. We make a little right angle here. I'll show you more as we go along. The reason why we do that is we get a really cute little point on the corner of our quilt. Now, I think it's Missouri Star Quilt Company have got a fabulous binding tutorial. So if my instructions aren't clear enough or you can't follow me very easily, then do have a look at them. They are on YouTube. It's an American company. I think it's one of their older videos. But if you just put in binding tutorial from Missouri Star Quilt Company, that will help. So I'm going to take my stitch length back down to 2.2 because we're on construction again. So at the moment I've only just clipped one side of the quilt down. I haven't clipped it all down. Make sure you can see what I'm doing. Okay. So we're leaving a flap. So let's just loosen that one off. Put this in. And now I have still got my needle set across to the edge of my my needle position is across to the right, so that it's going to give me a nice little seam, because I can follow the edge of the quilt here, and then I know I'm going to be fine with the edge of my foot. So I'm going to start and reverse and start and stop. So reverse. And through all the layers is exactly where this walking foot does work. Just fold your quilt up if it's getting in the way, so you can work with it, because you don't really want any drag. When you get close to a clip, just take it off. We're on the bottom of the quilt at this moment in time. I think I said that. So when we get towards the end here, we're going to stop on about 1/4 of an inch away from this end, from the side seam, and then go off at an angle. So nice and steady as you get there. A little bit more, I think. And then leave your needle in your work, lift up your presser foot, and then I'm just going to sew off to the edge at a 45-degree angle, or thereabouts. Needle up, cut the threads. Right. So what we've got our flap at the start, we've got our nice neat edge there that's going to fold over to the back, and we're going to sew that down. And then we've come off at the edge here. Now, if you feel like we've not sewn very well, keep your needle in your work. If you find that you're using an ordinary presser foot and you keep getting ripples underneath, do a few stitches, but then just lift up your presser foot and lower it back down again, and hopefully that will release any tension that's building up underneath, and just keep pulling your work straight. You might have to just take it a little bit slower, but you will get there, so just persevere. So we're coming up to the corner now, so we're going to sew up to the corner, about 1/4 of an inch away from the corner, we're going to stop. Unfortunately, we've got a join on this corner, which is not going to help it much, but we'll... So one more stitch, I think we'll leave it there. Okay, so then we're going to just twist it then 45 degrees, and we're just going to go off the edge here to the point. Needle up. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to just fold this little bit of this fabric back, so that it makes a right angle against the edge of the quilt, like that. And make sure this is all lined up here. And then we're going to start 1/4 of an inch in from this top edge and down, and start sewing again. So just to confirm that again, we've sewn it off to the end. So we're going to fold the, you're going to pull this, let me get my words right. You're going to pull this strap back, this length of binding back, and what you want to do is you want to lie it so that you've got a square here over the corner. Can you see? So we've got a loose bit here, that's where our stitching was originally, and we've got this loose bit here that when we lie it back, it's perfectly along the top of the quilt there, and it's at a right angle straight down here with this. And then we're going to start sewing again about 1/4 of an inch in from here, and then we're going to sew down. Put a pin in if you need to, just to hold it steady for you. So about there. And the idea is that you miss the original bit of your quilt. mine's not liking the stitch in here, so I think it's just a bit deep for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and just put a few stitches in to just hold that corner. There's only 4 of them, so I can do it by hand and that won't matter. So you might have to do the same on yours. Just line up the edge of the quilt all the way along. Just keep stopping and adjusting it as you need to. Be a little bit difficult to manoeuvre with all of this thickness of fabric underneath. Oh, let me get rid of some of these threads that are built up. Again, just lie it flat. It's a marathon, not a sprint. This is, you just got, because you're working with so much fabric, just take your time. So coming up to the corner again, so we're going to stop about 1/4 of an inch away. About there. And we're going to aim in towards the corner. Take a look out. I've only got four corners, so it doesn't take too much to worry. And then what we're going to do again now is we're going to fold this edge, the raw edge, in, so it's going to touch the quilt. Then we're just going to adjust this here, the excess on the corner, so that it forms a nice square. So that's our loose bit. There's our stitches from before. There's our loose bit. Lie it flat, and then we can put it under. And we're going to start now. What we need to do is we need to do a bit along here, but we're going to stop because we need an overlap. And I'll show you what I mean by an overlap in a minute. So start about 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. That's it. I do just go back a couple of stitches just to hold it. And then what we're going to do is we need these two raw ends here to overlap, but we need some room to work with them. So I'm going to do a couple more inches, then I'm going to stop, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm just going to reinforce that by get back tacking a little bit. Right. So what we want to do now is we want to work now with this crossover bit here. And the rule of thumb is, oh, lots of thread, sorry folks. The rule of thumb is that however wide your binding is, that's the amount of overlap that you need. So we lie our quilt down so that it's flat. Put that piece down onto here and lie this piece over it. So if I put a mark as to where the ends of those quilts are, those two bits of binding are, which is there, yep. And then I'm going to use my seam gauge here to measure 2 1/4 because that was the width of our quilt, and then I'm going to put a little mark here as well. So what I'm going to do now, so those are the 2 marks. So that's the edge of the binding that we've done underneath. Oh, can you just see? Yeah, that's the edge of the binding that we've done underneath, and then further down the same width as whatever this is. So if you've forgotten, don't worry, just open it out and just measure it. Look, we're at 2 1/4 inches on there. So that's how much we have to overlap here. So 1 mark for where our quilting started, just to make it easy for us, and then 2 1/4, so just before that star. And then I'm just going to snip my binding off. Okay. If you don't want to snip it off, then don't worry, you don't have to just yet. You can just wait and see what's going to happen. The original one where you started, I want you to open that one up, and I want you to draw a 45-degree angle. Use this quilting rule, it's got a 45-degree angle on it. Just there to the corner. Then we're just going to draw a line from there. That'll just give us our sewing line. when we're joining these together. And we want them to be together like this when it's all finished. So we're going to take the one that we've just finished with, we're going to open it out and kind of fold it back on itself. We're then going to take this one here, which is the one we started with, and then lay it on top. And we're going to then pin it together, because we're going to test it first to make sure that we've got it lying correctly first before we stitch this. So if I then put a pin on the stitching line just there, and then another pin here, either side of this fold, because we want that to fold in half when it's sewn. And then if we pull it out, then we can see that that there is going to then fold neatly and give us our nice little edge, and that should fit perfectly then. If we sew on that line and we've got our measurements correct, that should fit perfectly without any extra. So let me just show that again. I will link the video to the Missouri Star Quilt Company video of doing this, because they're the experts, and it will just make it easy. So this is our quilt, this is where we started with. So on this first flap where we started, we're going to draw a 45-degree angle away from that one. So we're just going to put our ruler on top of that edge, find our 45-degree line, and then just draw a line, which is what I've done there. Okay, so that's going to be there. We're then going to take this section here, and we're going to fold it back on itself, up and away back to the corner we've just sewn. And then we're going to take this end here and just place it straight on top. So remember when we were joining the binding earlier, we needed it just to be so that it joined together and on that diagonal, and we sew the outside corners. Oops. See, let's just do what they say as well, and let's just put binding clip just to hold this together out of our way to give us more room to work with. That's better. So this one again, up and over, and this one here. Never struggled with this before until I'm on camera. Isn't that always the same? Okay, so I'm just putting a pin down along that 45-degree angle, because this allows us just to test it before we sew it. Yep. Oops. And then if we pull the quilt under the binding clip and pull the quilt apart, that should then just fold together, and once we've trimmed it, it will sit nicely against that edge. So I'm comfortable that that's right. Let's put the binding clip back in while we're just working with those edges so that it doesn't pull too much. Get our sewing machine. Make sure you're in shot, and you are. And then now we're just going to fold this open and hold it straight. It does look a little bit fiddly, but it's worth persevering with. It's a good technique to have. And then we're just going to do a couple of stitches, watching out for our pin. I just wanted to anchor those edges down, and I'm just sewing on that line. The more accurate you can be with sewing this, the neater your binding will be when it comes to finishing it off. So there we go, let's take that out. So that's what it looks like when it's done. Snip that end off. And again, I'm always a double checker. So you're just going to check this again and make sure that's sitting nicely, and it is. So now what I'm going to do is just snip this end off here, about 1/4 inch again as well. I use 1/4 inch quite a lot. It's just under 1 centimetre, I think, isn't it? Finger press that open. Reinstate the fold that we've got on the fabric. And then that should then just fit nicely along there. So let's start stitching. This video is going to be a long one, isn't it, folks? Sorry about that. Okay, so here we're just going to start off again. Just overlap the stitches slightly. Needle in our work so it always finishes in that way. So in the interest of transparency, I have gone back and I have just tightened mine up just by 1 millimetre over from where I sewed originally. So you can see my original line, and it's like 1 or 2 millimetres over. It was just a little bit looser than I liked. I just did exactly the same thing, just took out my unpicker, unpicked the original stitching and opened it out again. So it's just exactly the same. So now when I fold it over, and then put it down onto the quilt. So I suppose what I'm saying is just make sure that your binding is you're better off being slightly tighter than slightly looser, I think is what I'm saying on there. But if you're not happy, just unpick it and just do it again. You know, nobody's going to know. I mean, you know that I've had to because I'm on video, but if I was just doing this at home just by myself, nobody would know, and it's the finished result that matters more than how many times we tried to get it right. So I'm just going to finish off this binding and join it together now. Fingers crossed for me, please. Join up at the end there. So as we can see, I've just taken a little tuck there that I needed, but on this side the binding's completely flat. Okay, we've got a few threads in there that are poking through from the other side. Just take those out. We can tidy all of this up later as well, so don't worry too much about all these little threads at the moment, but I just want to get them out of the way so they don't detract you from what I'm doing. So we've got a nice join there that's on the diagonal like we have before, and as I say, what I would suggest you do is go and watch the Missouri Star Quilt Company video, because they're much more eloquent and much more professional than me, but that's the one that I used, and I found that it works really well, when you get it right, that is, but it does work really well. So we're on the homeward stretch now, because now that we've got this binding on, what we're going to do now is we're going to fold the edge back, the folded edge back, and to match up with our stitch line we use our binding clips just to hold it in place, and then I'm going to hand stitch this down. Now some people will say you can machine stitch it, and you can. I just don't think it's as neat as it is if you machine stitch it. So it's up to you. If you're short of time, then by all means fold it back. Just make sure that your folded edge, when you put your fingers on it, is lower than where you're stitching in, and the idea would be to stitch in the ditch just there, or just on the edge of your quilt just here, to try and keep it nice and neat. And so long as that folded edge is past where you're going to be stitching, it should come out quite nice and neat. But for me, I'm going to put a TV program on, and I'm going to sit and hand stitch this, because I really enjoy hand stitching, and it'll just all go together nicely like that. When you're looking at it as well, when you're sat there and pulling out all the little threads that you've got, just pull your stitches back, your binding back, and just see if you can see any of your tacking stitches or any loose threads anywhere. There was somewhere along here I could see some tacking stitches. Where have they gone? Let's see if I can find them. Because all we have to do then is just undo them. So they're going to be on the top edge, aren't they? Because all you have to do then is just pull this back, see if you can see any stitches, and if you can just use your quick unpick and just unstitch those, and then snip them off really close to the edge, and you won't see those. But I don't think I've got that many actually, which is, oh here, look, here's a classic example. Oops. So here we've got some stitches here, so you can see how big they are. So you can just put your quick unpick underneath like that, and just take those out on this side here with your quick unpick. And then once you've gone through, just be really careful not to catch your fabric with your with the blade of your unpicker and put a rip in it. So just do concentrate on this bit here, because you're so close to the end now. And then if you just massage the fibres with your finger, you'll see that those holes disappear. And then, as I say, once the binding's on, that'll look really nice and neat. But that's why we use the big stitch when we're just doing those tack-in stitches, because we just want to be able to take these out, and they're much easier to take out when they're bigger. And if you have anywhere where you think that you need to just go back, and if you've not taken it close enough to the a big enough bite onto the get your words right, Claire. If there's anywhere where you feel you've not gone close enough to the edge on the stitching here, so perhaps here I feel I'm a bit too close. I mean, I think it's fine personally on here, but if you feel like you're too close, then you can always just put it back in your machine again and just run along it just to tidy that up. So the choice is yours. This is now just me being perfectionist, as you know that sometimes I try to be, or as close as I can be. But it's up to you as to what you're comfortable with and what you're not, and where your tolerance level lies. So again, you can just pull these, undo these stitches. You can leave them in if you want to, or take them out. It's up to you. But I'm just going to take mine out and just neaten everything up. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to, as I say, just hand stitch this binding back over, and that fully encases the raw edge on the back there, and then it just makes it really nice and neat for you and gives it a nice firm finish. So let me come back to you when I've done that. Okay, sometime later I've watched a few episodes of a series, and I've got most of my binding onto my quilt, but I thought I'd just bring you along now and just show you the stitch that I use in order to do this, and hopefully that'll be useful to somebody if you've not sewn binding on before. So I've left a gap for me to do with you. So I'll just set you up nice and close, and then we'll be able to get this quilt fully bound. Okay, so this is how it looks when it is completely finished on the correct side. Oh, sorry, on the back side. So as you can see, it's a very neat little stitch. Hardly can see it if you use the matching thread. On the front then we've got the nicely sewn, that's a little thread there, you'll keep finding little threads all over the place for a few days. Just keep looking it over and just keep trimming them off when you find them. Sorry, getting distracted. Okay, so that's the way that I want it to be finished. I've mitered these corners as well. You literally just fold it under, stitch across to the end, and then fold the other side over and stitch across, and that will give you this nice little neat little mitered corner front and back. And if you want to, you can just put a couple of stitches in just to hold those edges together, which I might well do. So I've got my needle and thread, and my thread is double. Sometimes you do get little loops in it, but they're quite easy to get out. What I do first of all is work the backwards, if you like. So I'm going to take a couple of stitches in here first, just to anchor that thread in so it doesn't come undone. It doesn't have too much pressure on it, but it's just nice just to anchor it in. Come out where we're going to be starting stitching. And then you can either use your fingernail, or the edge of your needle just to swipe those threads under. And then what we're going to do now is for the first stitch, we're just going to just come out through the binding, just to kind of start us off in the right place. And then what I want to do is take a little stitch now, and we're going to go straight down from where the binding is, where that stitch is. I'm going to take a little bite out of our quilt, and we're going to just travel along onto our next stitch, going through the binding. So we've taken a bite out of the quilt back. In this case it's the doweling rod, but the quilt back, and we're coming out through the binding. Excuse my needle being bent, they do get bent just with being used, so it doesn't put me off at all. I hope it doesn't put anybody else off, but just in case you've noticed that. And then again, we then pull this quite tight, make sure there's no loops in the thread, and then we go in again, almost directly underneath where we've just come out. We travel behind, fabric's quite thick. This is where if you've got a thimble it does help. And then we then pull this through. If you get a little loop in your threads, just separate the threads and just pull them apart. I like the strength that 2 threads gives me, but it's just that sometimes you do get a little loop. So again, we're just going to carry on doing this. Now I do quite small stitches because I like that neat effect. Obviously it's your quilt, it's up to you how far apart you do your stitches. And just pull that through and pull it tight. And as you can see, that just holds it down really nicely and creates a really nice effect. So again, in underneath in the back of the quilt and come out. So you're travelling along. I'm not going through to the front of the quilt at all. So you're just travelling through. Try not to stab yourself at the same time. And just smooth your binding down as you go in. I tend to use the stitching line for the binding as being my guide. Sometimes if you press it down on your work surface, if you can't get your stitches through, it's quite thick where this binding is. And that just gives me a nice even line to finish, and it should mirror then the front of the quilt. Just keep smoothing it along. Got my thimble on, it would be a lot easier. I don't know where it is at the moment, so I just want to get carried on, because I want to try and get this video live for you. I know some of you have been waiting quite a long time, and I thank you for your patience. Life got in the way, I'm afraid, and that has to come first, but we're still in good time for Christmas, so hopefully everybody will forgive me. Right, okay, so we're just going to go across where the handle is now. So I am just, because the handle is already secured down here into the binding anyway, behind the dowel loop, I'm just going to sew this across the back of the handle. I'll show you what we do with the handles in a bit when we get further along. Let me just see if I can find my thimble, because that'll make this a lot easier. Hold on one second. Okay, so this is the kind of thimble that I like to use, which has got like a silicone cup to it, and then it's got the bowl on the end, because the bowl on the end you can use to push your needle up, but the silicone is like a gripper on the needle, so it does help to pull it through. So again, let's take a little bite, and this time I can use the end of the thimble to push my needle through, and then the silicone makes that better, especially if your hand's a little bit warm like mine do get sometimes, then it can be really helpful just to push it through. Just give your threads a little pull every now and again, just make sure they're nice and taut. And again, we're just going to go through like this, and we're going to go through all the way to the end. And I've only got a few inches left to do now, just got from there to there to do, so not too much longer now. It does take a while. I just like the effect that this gives you. Obviously, if you've chosen to machine sew yours down, then you'll probably be ahead of me. But yeah, quite a nice relaxing thing to do while you're watching TV. Minimal concentration needed really, it's just a nice repetitive mindful thing to do. So I'll come back to you once we've got to the end and we're ready to cast off. You can share my joy then, binding's finished. And then we're going to just tack down these straps to make sure that they're in the right position and sitting nicely. We're going to sort out the dowel and get the dowel put in. And then we have some grand reveal pictures, I think, that are due. And some filling of the, oh now you can see here we've got a couple of loops, look, can you see? So what I do now is I just pull these threads apart, just give them a little tug. Sometimes one's one I think and one's the other. It doesn't come straight away, sometimes a little knot. Just put your needle through the loop and it sometimes will release it. If not, we will just tuck that little loop inside the work, inside the binding. Right, that's not going to go. So what we're going to do is just take that thread and tuck it underneath with the point of the needle into a gap and hide it. It's not going to compromise the strength of the seam, because the other thread will be taut. There we go, just tuck it under like that and it's just gone. Sometimes it's not about not going wrong, it's about knowing how to fix it, isn't it? So, as I said, I'm going to just carry on with this now, nearly finished. It's just tougher on this side where the hanging loop and the handles are, that's the only trouble here. And just make sure I've got another loop there, look. That's the trouble with two threads, but it is best. Just give one thread a pull and it just comes straight. Okay, so let me just get this finished off and I'll be back to you. So as you can see, we've now finished this binding. I just did a few stitches in place and then just a couple of stitches along in the ditch, which is the difference between these two bits here, just along there on top of each other, just going through the just this fabric on the side here. And then I just then buried my needle through the work, through the binding, not coming out the other side, and then put a little bit of tension on it and then snipped my thread. I did record it, but then I went wrong, so then I decided that I needed to delete it, and of course I've deleted too far. So guys, today has not been my day. Right, okay, so what we're going to do now is, with these straps, I don't want them to pull the front of the quilt forward and for it to bend over like that. So I'm just going to stitch these back against the top of the quilt binding here. So I'm just going to take a couple of stitches here in the binding. Can hide that knot, hopefully. Just the other side there with the needle, and then we can hold it tight. Right, okay, a couple of stitches there just through the binding and through the strap. Try not to get loops in our threads, but we seem to do that all the time. So I'm just going to now just take a couple of stitches down here, making sure that knot's in and hidden. The end here, oops, sewing machine's making a noise. Mainly because I'm leaning on it. Right, okay. Just on the edge here, just trying to do that nice and neatly. Just to make it hang nicely, so it's not an essential step. If you've done and had enough, then you're okay. We are on the homeward stretch, I promise though. Okay, I'm just going to travel now up behind here because we've got that all settled in. Another loop. Let's separate the threads and give it a tug. Okay, that's okay. And then what I'm going to do is just bend that strap back just along the edge. So I've just folded it, so there's the strap going over the top. So I just want to bend it back along that edge there, and we can just do a little bit of a ladder stitch. So I'll take a little bite out of here, put it tight, and a little bite out of the strap, and I'm trying not to go through both sides. Oops. And then loops again, give it a little tug, and then a little smidge out of the binding. Another little smidge out of the strap. I'm just going to go do that all the way along here. Just alternating out of the strap or out of the binding itself. And hopefully these little stitches will just be invisible just on the back of this, but it'll just hold that strap and just help dissipate the weight away from the back of it. The next thing that I'm going to do after doing this on both sides is I'm going to seal up one side of my dowel first, my dowel pocket, and then I am going to feed the dowel in and see where it needs to be amended, because I think it'll be a little bit too long at the moment. I did manage to just use one piece, which was great, and that piece was 1 metre long for me, so I just cut it in half. But of course now I've got to cut it again because it's not quite short enough. So when we get to the other end here, just going to do a couple of stitches in place just to hold this side of the strap. And if you can see from that side, look, you're not going to see the stitches, but it'll just make sure that binding doesn't tip forward because of the weight of the calendar, especially when it's full as well. So I'll just come back through to the other side here. My thread is definitely wanting to knot today. Just be patient with it. Just give it a few little tugs and it'll come tight. Don't tug it too much so that you break your thread though. There we go, out it go then. Right, let's just turn this quilt over. I want to do a couple of stitches just at the top here just to hold that together. Oops, trying to forget to be on camera. And just back down this side here. Hope that's not too close for you, making you dizzy. I'm looking forward to showing you this all in one go and doing a little bit of a reveal video. That would be really quite nice. Just a couple of stitches in place just to hold this down. Trying to minimise loops. Goodness me, I don't know what is going on with this thread today. I threaded it on the needle the same way as it came off the reel, so it's not that. Okay, and then I'm just going to just thread it back again, just through the binding and come out a bit further down to just through the side there, and then snip it off. So that's what I've done, so that now if when we hang this up, you'll see that there's no, it's not going to tip forward, that edging isn't going to tip forward. So if we compare the two sides, so if I hang it by this side, can you see how there's a gap between the binding and the strap? And all I've done is sewn the top of that strap to there, so that now when this is hung, you won't see, it doesn't tip forward. So let me do the other side and then we can move on. So finish off doing the straps, they're all both stitched down now. So the next stage then was to insert the dowel into the sleeve, which we've done. And I've pushed it right, I have sewn the end up just neatly as well there, so the dowel won't push through. But then if I push it in and smooth it along so that there was no gaps, then what I've done is just pulled it slightly out and marked a new cutting line, which is going to be there. So it's only a small amount that I've got to take off. And I've also got a T for top and a B for bottom, so that I don't get the dowels mixed up, just in case there is any slight variation in them. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to chop off the end of this dowel here, and then I'm going to push it all the way into there, and then I'm just going to pull the ends of the fabric across and then just stitch those in place. That will then keep that nice and rigid for us and make it stand all nice. So let me go and do that bit and then we'll be carrying on. Just thought of one thing before I finish off this quilt and sew the second bit of doweling in. What I wanted to just do was demonstrate to you how the top of the quilt is if you don't put the doweling in. So this is actually the bottom of the quilt because I've already sewn the top bit in, but if we hang this up onto the side here for you, hopefully you can see, oops, hopefully you can see that the top of this quilt just starts to gather in. And of course, by the time you've got the weight of the treats in, pulling it down even more, you can see how it starts to fold in over the top. So as I say, if we just, by contrast, just turn this round, if I just tie a quick bow in the top here, just to be able to show you. Because it might be the decider between whether you go to the trouble of putting the dowel in or not. But then if you put the top on there, look, then you can see there's just no way that's going to give way in the middle and lose its shape, because that's absolutely rigid in there. So that's the reason why I put the dowel in, and hopefully that's just demonstrated why I think it's a good idea just before I finish off. So I've got my second piece of dowel cut to size, I'm just going to thread it into the dowel pocket at the bottom. That'll keep the bottom nice and flat too. And then I'm just going to sew it shut. So let's do that bit. So all that remains now is for me to sew on my quilt label, the tie that I made out of one of the wooden blanks. And I've just drilled 4 holes in the corners, which I'm just going to do some stitches over. But in order to position that, what I've done is I've just put 2 of the ornaments into the bottom 2 pockets here, because I'm going to put it at the centre bottom just here. So if I turn the quilt over, I can feel where those two blocks are, and I want it to just sit in the middle, just like that, between the 2. So that will about do for me. And then I'm going to use some pink thread, and I'm just going to sew that in place on there, so that when that's folded up, this one, I need to varnish it first, just remember, just in time. But when I varnished it, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep those, I've got those 2 there, you can see how they fold there and there. I found the middle, I'm going to put that on the top, and then I'm just going to sew that on in place, just with a couple of stitches going that way, a couple that way in pink, I think, which will just look nice, or red maybe. I'll choose whichever, and then I'll take some pictures when it's finished. But for now, I just need to varnish this just so that it's obviously just stays on there, just nice and neat. But that's how I'm going to finish that off. So I'll take some pictures in a minute of it all finished, and then I can get this video uploaded and ready for you to watch and to have a go at doing your own. Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and I just wanted to share this little video with you at the end to show you our completed advent calendar. So this is the completed panel. I can't go in too close, otherwise you're going to lose some of the perspective of it, but there we go with the loop at the top. And I've just put some of the little decorations onto a wreath just to show you how they will look if you chose to display it that way. Obviously I was hoping that there'll be a little Christmas tree for Clementine, who's going to receive this advent calendar. But a wreath works well, and that's what I got available at the moment, so hopefully you get a bit of the idea. So if I just zoom in without making anybody sick, hopefully that'll be okay. And just see the quilt in the 3D detail. See the loop at the top and how the doweling is keeping that top of that advent calendar straight. The sides don't look too bad either, straight, as you know I was worried about those and whether that'd be straight enough. And then we've got the pockets down the bottom there with some of the ornaments inside, and I probably would tuck the little strings inside a little bit more, but just for now, just to show you how they look and how they fit in, and it all works quite nicely. And then we've got some of the decorations over here. And these have all got the little words on the back of them as well, so that it's hopefully going to last a little bit longer, not just babyish pictures or cute pictures, but then with little words that can mean something to her as she gets older. And I'll just show you the back. And this is the back of the panel. So I'm quite pleased with the lack of puckers on the back there. We've got the doweling rod at the bottom and the little plaque that I've put on as my quilt label, but obviously you can choose whatever you like. And then there's just all nice and neat, all the stitches hidden, and a nice effect at the end, and the doweling rod pocket at the back there. So that's it. We're all done. It's all finished. Hopefully you are as delighted with yours as I am with mine. I'm absolutely thrilled. I love the finish on it. I know that we've taken extra time, but I think that for me that shows in the final product. Hopefully you feel that it's all the steps that we've talked about have been worthwhile for you too, and that you've enjoyed the process, because you know you've created something wonderful, and I hopefully you're really proud of yourself and for what you've achieved too. You'll have learned lots of skills along the way, picked up lots of tips and tricks hopefully. If it's your first foray into quilting as well, hopefully you've enjoyed that journey, and there's lots and lots of tutorials out there as to how to create wonderful quilts, and this is just the start of for you. Hopefully you've enjoyed seeing the little ornaments that I've made as well to put in as the no sweet treats, but of course stuff it full of chocolate if you wish to. Absolutely fine, no judgment here at all. It was just that I wanted something that would last for many years without Clementine's parents having to think about what to pop in the pockets each time, and I'm hopeful it'll grow with her as she gets older too. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate your patience and the time that you've taken to watch my videos. If you haven't subscribed as yet, I really would appreciate it. It's lovely every time you get a new subscriber. It's a little thrill, and it really does just really boost my morale as well, because you know, I mean, this last video I think is nearly 2 hours long, and if you count up all the hours of the videos that we've done of the tutorials, and then that doesn't include the editing and then the posting. So if you are able to click on that subscribe button, then I really do appreciate it. If you don't want to, no problem at all, totally understand. But as I say, it's always nice to know that I've got people along. Drop me a comment if you like as well. Hopefully, you know, maybe this actual panel itself isn't your taste, and some of the things that I've done aren't to your taste or to your specification. But again, you can still learn from the process, hopefully, and pick that up and use that on your own project to make it your own, whatever you choose to do. So for now, this is my first advent calendar for a grandchild. Who knows, I may have more grandchildren in the future, and I know for certain that if I do, I will be making them another advent calendar like this one. So to all of those future grandchildren, then I look forward to meeting you. And to everybody else who's watched the video, thank you so much. Have a great day. Happy stitching, and if any problems or any issues at all, then just give me a shout. It's been great to show you my journey. Take care everybody, and Merry Christmas. Bye.